Hello, my little queer, and everyone else who decided to click on this video. I'm so glad that you're here, and let's get comfortable. So, I'm back in the closet. I've been home for a month now, and no one in my immediate circle knows that I'm trans. That was a big concern for me when coming back home. People using the wrong name and pronouns, questioning why I dress a certain way, and scrutinizing my every move as I awkwardly fail at pretending to be a woman. I wish I didn't have to go through this, but it is inevitable when I'm back in my deeply religious, homophobic country. Despite this, I've tried to focus on the sweeter things, like how is it that I'm experiencing more moments of euphoria and feeling a deeper sense of peace in my trans identity, even though I can't outwardly express myself in the way that I want to? Despite being in this compromising situation where I can't outwardly express my gender identity, I've found new ways to feel more affirmed in myself. This experience has made me reflect on the ways dysphoria shapes or doesn't shape our sense of identity. So let's talk more about what dysphoria actually means for trans people and why it shouldn't be the defining feature of our experience. I've started feeling more affirmed in myself despite being in such a compromising situation. All the tools that I'd usually use to combat dysphoria, like changing my hair, getting a tattoo, hanging out with my queer friends, or dressing more masculine, have to be done so discreetly that it almost doesn't feel worth the effort. And yet, I'm a little shocked at how okay I've been. Before I go further, I want to acknowledge that my experience may be unique since I am FDM. I feel that society is less protective of masculinity than it is of femininity, which is rooted in misogyny. Society just hates women. And what I mean by that is that there's far more violence, scrutiny, and policing of those society has labeled as men when they are presenting as feminine compared to women presenting as masculine. For example, a trans woman might be harassed or even assaulted just for wearing a dress, while a trans man wearing traditionally masculine clothing might just be ignored or brushed off. This disparity shows how deeply society is invested in controlling femininity, particularly when it's perceived as out of place. In a patriarchal society, femininity is expected to be flawless, pristine, demure, and constantly catering to the male gaze. I hear far more horror stories from my trans girlfriends than my trans guy friends, which highlights the dichotomy of transphobia. Trans women often face violence, while trans men face disregard. But both are harmful. I also want to note that nothing I'm about to say is groundbreaking. The world is old, and I'm sure these thoughts aren't new. If you've heard or read something similar, don't gatekeep. Share resources in the comments, because after all, we are here to learn together. A good place to start is with dysphoria. I'm not going to use a medical definition since when it comes to transness, I don't trust most experts. Dysphoria was only added to the DSM-5 in 2013, and the WHO stopped calling being transgender a disorder in 2019. So here's my definition. Dysphoria is the feeling of disconnect and discomfort you experience when certain physical traits don't align with your chosen identity. This discomfort varies from person to person, and it's important to acknowledge that it exists on a spectrum. The way I react mentally and physically when I can't find my extra large, heavy cotton, boxy t-shirt isn't the same way my other mask friend might react. It's impossible to expect all trans people to experience the same level of dysphoria. Still, one point of contention within the trans community is the belief that I disagree with, that dysphoria is necessary to be trans. As someone whose dysphoria affects my day-to-day life, it was initially hard for me to understand how other trans people could present in a way that aligns with their assigned gender at birth and still be trans. But here's a question for you. Knowing how much discomfort dysphoria causes, why would you expect every trans person to experience it the same way you do? Your lived experience is valid, but projecting it onto others is essentially enforcing your own ideas of what a trans person should look like onto others. Let me rephrase that. You're projecting your idea of what a gender identity should be onto someone else. And doesn't that sound a little, dare I say, transphobic? The belief that dysphoria should be the core of someone's trans experience not only allows medical professionals to box trans people into unhealthy categories, but it also reduces the trans experience to suffering. It suggests that we can only be valid if we're in pain. That kind of thinking is dangerous because it undermines the joy and euphoria that many trans people feel when they're able to live authentically. whether or not they experience dysphoria. There is no stereotypical way to be trans, except, of course, monosyllabic names, the name Kai, autism, and being the hottest person in the room. But that's just my personal experience. We need to reject cisnormative ideology in trans spaces actively. This isn't about being binary or non-binary in your transition. It's about not enforcing those expectations you have for yourself onto others. This brings me to what spurred on the entire video: the blatant rejection of feminine trans men I've seen in media. Honestly, it boggles my mind why it is so painfully difficult for some to understand that sometimes a man just wants to feel the most bonita he has ever felt. This is apparently a sin if you're a trans man, because you should hate and detest everything feminine and swear it all off in exchange for, like, wearing a binder or something. Feels a bit regressive, with some trans men weaponizing their intense dysphoria to police how other trans men look. And seeing this level of harm within the community made me reflect on how I might have perpetuated similar harms towards myself. Moving away from the freedoms of the West and losing the ability to express my trans identity openly forced me to radically accept the fact that I am trans simply because I am, not because of dysphoria or because I've crafted a new identity for myself or because I have a community to validate me. I'm just trans. In my room, reading smut, I'm a gay boy. Wearing a very loose dress because I didn't pack enough baggy t-shirts for my trip back home, still a boy. On my period, rewatching Doctor Who and lusting over Christopher Eccleston, that's a fine young gentleman right there. I began to question why I wasn't embracing the fullness of my identity when I had quote-unquote all the freedoms too. So this part of the video focuses on some things that I have identified as contributing to the heightened levels of dysphoria when I was living in a place where my trans identity was more socially accepted. The first thing is the internal and external perception. This is quite complex due to the double-edged sword of being perceived by both cis and trans people. I get anxious just thinking about it because my reaction to others' perception always comes with the question, can they tell that I'm trans? If a little girl smiles at me, I pat myself on the back because it means that I'm not this scary, confusing thing. And if an older person looks at me disapprovingly, then of course they're transphobic. If an auntie or an uncle smiles at me, then they just must think I'm cute. And with trans people, it's another level of awkward. Do we nod at each other in trans camaraderie? Do I look trans enough to warrant the nod? Should I compliment them or ask about tape brands? What if that feels chasery? I always want to brighten their day, but ultimately I end up feeling like I'm intruding on their personal space. And though my existence isn't illegal yet, it doesn't resolve the fact that I live in an extremely binary society where acceptance is still scarce. It's a shame that harrowing experiences have forced trans people to move throughout the world with a heightened level of awareness, like prey. Moving from a society where I was outwardly presenting to one where my identity could only be validated by myself due to the inability to present as masculine shattered the idea that external perception and presentation was even necessary to exist and be valid as a trans person. The only eye that continued its scrutiny was that of the internal, tinged with transphobic rhetoric and policing me harder than Rowling ever could. I could argue that the internal voice is heavily influenced by the external. However, the main difference is that in private spaces, the voice of the external ceases to exist, though its rhetoric seeps deep into the inner voice. I had to practice the knowledge that I had and dismantle my self-directed transphobia, shifting a mindset and the way I spoke to myself and saw myself to one of care and affirmation. And honestly, that was the most difficult step towards feeling better about my situation. Instead of thinking about a dress as something restrictive and dysphoria-inducing, I began to think of all the qualities that I think men often echo when they wear loose dresses, like how amazing the breeze is and, the fact that my ribs aren't aching, but I'm not sure men will agree with any of those. This ultimately made it easier to pinpoint other things that diminished my sense of euphoria. That being media representation of trans people. This next point is going to be a little bit interesting because during that brief period when it seemed like the media was accepting of trans people, the icons presented were often binary. They underwent all the surgeries and passed so well that you might not even know that they were trans until TERFs in their comment sections exposed them or whatever. While it's fantastic to see trans people achieving their desired look, I find that social media often showcases those who fit a certain ideal, which can unintentionally create a standard that is out of reach for many. I see fabulous trans creators who quickly undergo gender affirming surgeries in the blink of an eye, which can be triggering and induce gender envy and exacerbate the feelings of inadequacy. As someone who already struggles with body image, focusing on physical and aesthetic standards have been detrimental. I've just decided to abandon that approach overall. No more saved folders or hidden albums dedicated to transition goals. My goal now is to reach 26 without crippling back pain and the ability to chase after the bus without heavy breathing, and I'm kind of failing at both of those already. This next point is accessibility and capitalism. I can't discuss media without addressing capitalism and how financial accessibility impacts and sometimes even caps one's transitioning process. Capitalism not only influences the cost associated with transitioning, but also fosters a sense of hopelessness by making it seem like presenting the way you want is always out of reach. The envy we might feel towards those who seem to transition effortlessly often includes envy of their financial status. We just don't acknowledge that second part. Consumerism can become a quick fix for dysphoria, as personally retail therapy offers quick temporary relief. However, the emphasis on physical appearance as a marker of transitioning creates harm by reinforcing the notion that transitioning requires buying your way into a specific look. But being trans is expensive, and hyper-focusing on physical attributes that can only be changed through financial means exacerbates this issue. I know surgeries won't magically eliminate all my dysphoria, but they might alleviate the discomfort in specific areas. However, I may never reach the financial point where I can afford surgery, and that's okay. I've made peace with the fact that I'm still trans regardless of my financial situation. I draw strength from the experiences of trans people who existed before surgeries, those who affirm their gender privately, and those who can't pursue gender-affirming procedures for various reasons. I'm a little disappointed that moving to a place where I couldn't outwardly express my transness led me to this level of understanding, awareness, and peace. However, I hope this experience serves as a springboard for embracing trans joy through bodily self-acceptance, recognizing that the body isn't impervious to change. I always think of trans people as conduits of want, harboring a powerful and beautiful secret that others don't know. But somewhere along the line, the focus shifted to the external and the vessel is carrying the secret rather than the secret itself. And that secret is, we are more than our physical bodies. Bodies will continue to exist in various forms outside the binary, serving purposes that don't necessarily serve us. There's an industry that feeds off of our dissatisfaction with how we look, and it's broader than just dysphoria. We cannot let it control us. So this isn't to say that I no longer feel dysphoria at all. I still do, but honestly, not as intensely. I'm curious to see how this will change and hold up when I eventually can go back to just being an unfiltered version of myself. I doubt I'll be picking up a shaving tool or a cute blouse anytime soon, but right now I'm kind of enjoying walking with my head held high and my shoulders straight because it does wonders for my back. I'm tired of shrinking myself in order to hide, and you should be too. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.